So just a recap. This is a build that I had run previously. I had run it with like the most available gear to farm because I wanted to show how easy it was to pull together a build that was incredibly powerful, that could push corruption, beat Abroth, and get you ready for other builds that we wanted to play, like help you farm items. It was a relatively good monolith farmer, relatively good mobility, relatively good damage, just generically good and easy to put together, right? Very low item requirements. This is now the version of the build that is a lot stronger, right? This build is something that I've made a lot tankier. I've gone more towards the damage and tankiness sector rather than mobility. We're not here for, you know, a new player friendly build anymore. So if you're interested in what it would be like to easily farm up this build, the previous video is probably what you want. Now, this is the version that we pushed a lot further because there were a lot of comments left saying, hey, you can push this build further. There are a lot of suggestions that they had in order to optimize the build. So I took some of the suggestions and tried them out. So let's go through it. We'll first start through talking about the general overview. So we are using Smite to apply fissures for our single target damage. And for our like auto bombing, we are using Void Cleave to give us Ravaging Aura, and also Devouring Orbs to trigger Void Rifts and stuff like that. And then we have Abyssal Decay with our Abyssal Echoes. So that's what we're doing. And then finally, when we're against bosses and things like that, we will pop Anomaly in order to do a burst of damage and to give us additional Void Shred. So that's how the build plays overall. Now, let's get into some of the changes of the skills. Smite. So this is our primary damage skill for our single target. We are specing into Fissure, which is a sub-skill of Smite that adds 10 mana whenever you cast a Fissure. You can cast up to 3 Fissures a second with Aftershock, and Fissures last for 3 seconds, giving us up to 9 active Fissures. So we want 9 active Fissures. We make our Fissures do 100% more damage. And Fissure is also affected by more multipliers on the Smite tree. So specifically not more hit damage, but just more damage. So things like Conflagration won't work because it's hit damage versus ignited, and Blinding Flash won't work because it's hit damage versus blinded. So those won't work because they're hit damage, but Sacrifice will work because it just says 250% more damage, which is pretty cool. And then we are taking a little bit of Atonement because we have extra points to put around. So a little bit of less damage taken from our Sacrifice. We don't cast that often, unlike our multi-strike build, which casts 12 smites per second. We don't cast that often, so we don't lose that much health. So it's a pretty good method to get a lot of damage. Okay, that's our Smite. This is our primary single target damage. Next, for our auto bombing capabilities, we are running Void Cleave, right? Void Cleave in order to get to Ravaging Aura from Ravager. This will give us a bunch, it'll give us a zone around us basically, where when we're running around, we are doing AoE damage. And it's a pretty good amount of damage. If you look right now, we have 10k DPS. It helps us clear all the white mobs, right? We don't need to do anything when we're going through white mobs, even at 700 corruption. So it's a pretty solid skill. It also autocasts Abyssal Echoes for us, which is a powerful skill. I do have 5 points into Warped Decay because I think Into the Depths and Abyssal Walker, they give you 10% more damage. And I think those apply to the sub skills, which is Ravager, right? But I'm not entirely sure. If they do, I would recommend pulling the 4 points out of here and putting them across these 2 nodes in order to get the additional 40% more damage, because it could be nice. You are already getting a lot of time to rot chance and maxing out your time to rot stacks at 12 with all your other skills, so it's not too important to run this. But that's what I would recommend. And that's what we're doing with Void Cleave. So Void Cleave is there, and then we're running Devouring Orb for our other auto bombing capabilities. We are auto casting it off cooldown whenever we're moving. So obviously I'm not moving right now, so none of them are being cast, but if I start moving, there you go. You see it getting cast. Now, I've changed this ability a lot since working on the build. A lot of people recommended that, you know, I go into Abyssal Missions, and it made a lot of sense. It does additional damage. I do believe it's a hit, which is unfortunate, but it scales with Vitality, which is our primary damaging ability. It also applies Void Res Shred, which is handy because we can take off Shred from other places in order to put it here. And then we are going to Abyssal Juggernaut to fix any of our mana problems. The reason why we're going into Abyssal Juggernaut is because we want the Void Essence, and Void Essence, when we hit 0 mana, will refund our mana, so we never run out of mana anymore. So that was a minor problem with the previous build. We had points into mana regen for that specific reason. We can take those out in order to run this instead and apply those points elsewhere. Okay, so that's our Devouring Orb, our other auto-bombing capability. Then we should talk about Abyssal Echoes. So remember, it's cast from Void Cleave. It gives us the Embrace the Darkness debuff. I probably took points out of here at one point, so I need to move a point from Void Supremacy back into here. But it gives us 20% more damage for 5 seconds whenever we cast it from Void Cleave. It also gives us Abyssal Decay, which is an ailment that is damage over time for 5 seconds, so that's pretty solid. And finally, when they're affected by Abyssal Decay, they take an additional 24% more damage. So, there you go. It's just a good damage champ. Abyssal Decay is now wrapped up, so we'll go on to the last change, which is Anomaly. So before, I was running Volatile Reversal. It was a good movement skill. It was giving us Void Bolts, and I believe Void Bolts are, yeah, it's a Void spell that scales with Intelligence, so it doesn't really scale with what we want to scale. But considering that it would also apply Time Rot, and then those Time Rots would make them take additional damage over time taken, it was pretty decent. However, we are now running Anomaly. Anomaly is giving us a lot of things that are very important. It's giving us a mini pop over here with Quicksand, which increases ailment speed on return. So you'll do like a big tick of damage because you apply all your ailments really quickly. So Quicksand gives us a good chunk of damage. It'll then refresh those ailments, so that extends the duration again, so they keep on doing their ailment damage. And for 3 seconds after it's applied, enemies will take 50% additional void damage, right? So this is pretty good all in all. We are reducing the cooldown as much as possible and then giving us Time Bubble. Time Bubble, of course, applies slow stacks and Void Res Shred. Oh my gosh, try saying that 5 times fast. Generally good utility for us. But yeah, that's all the skill changes. On to gearing changes. So, gearing. We are now running Red Ring of Atlaria, and the reason is we want to not run Wandering Spirit Ring anymore. We don't want to run Flames of Midnight anymore because the tier 7 strength isn't too important to us, right? We're Vitality scaling primarily. The strength only helps with our armor, which is nice. And then we are getting Void Pen and Void Res Shred and stuff like that from a lot of different places, so the 16% we were getting previously from the ring isn't that impactful, right? So we're running Red Ring in order to get the 10% less damage taken. We're getting some Vitality over here with the all attributes. We're getting the resistance, which is important because we can move resistance off of other locations to free up different slots. And then we're getting crit avoidance. If you look here at our defenses, we're at 93%, so this is pretty much capping us. So overall, a good Red Ring. Okay. Next, a change that we made is we stopped running Core of the Mountain. So Core of the Mountain was an easily farmable body armor from the Lightless Arbor dungeon from tier 4. Pretty reasonable to get, easy to farm. So it was what I was going for. I was getting my crit reduction from here. So since I've moved it out now, I've opened up that slot, and I can now put Vitality on there to get even more health and armor, or sorry, health and damage. I can also now run Null Portent, which gives me increased health, right? That's something that Core of the Mountain didn't do. Increased health obviously makes me a lot tankier, but we get 1% less damage taken per 2% resist over the normal resistance cap. So considering we can have 20% less damage taken, this means we can have 40% additional resistances apply, right? So we want to be at around 115 for all our resistances to take less damage. Now, the important ones are Physical, Poison, Necrotic, and Void, because those are directly taken. And because of our passive, we have the passive, let's see, it's under the Void Knight tree very end, Abyssal Fluctuation. We take elemental damage as void damage. So it's not too important, it's not too important to be max capped for those, but even then there is value to be had by capping those out. So we're taking a bunch of less damage there, for about 20% across the board, less damage from overcapping our resistances, which is why we want the Red Ring. So all in all, we're taking, I think, like 38% less damage now as a result of the two choices that we made. from those, right? And then we do have the same amount of block chance and block effectiveness. We can probably push this up a little bit with our passive points, but I think I've opted for, because we have the less damage taken, I've opted for more damage oriented builds. So those are the primary changes. I do have a different Decayed Skull, so I have tier 7 Vitality on here as a max roll and a pretty good roll on health. And the reason I moved out of Inflicting Time to Rot is because we have a lot of sources of damage over time, right? We have our Fissure, which is our primary source of single target. We have our Ravaging Aura. We have our Time Rot. And then we have our Abyssal Decay. We have our Void Rifts, right? And then we have our Devouring Orbs themselves. So the point is that since we have like 6 or 7 sources of damage over time, Rot Grip applying, so Rot Grip, for those who don't know, gives you time to rot damage per 1% time to rot chance with void skills. So 1% time to rot chance equals 2% time to rot damage, and it's a more multiplier, right? So this previously gave us 108% more damage with time rot, right? 108% more damage with time rot is a lot of damage, but considering we have like 5 or 6 different sources of damage over time that are not time rot, we're opting to buff those up and buff our HP and buff our tankiness and sacrifice a little bit damage from time rot in order to make that happen. What does this mean? Well, this means we also do a little bit less damage from our anomaly pop, but going forward into a higher corruption, trading damage for tankiness, that feels pretty solid. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of the item changes, I think, oh, there's one more to talk about. Code of the Erased Sentinel. Before we were running Anchor, so let me pull up my Anchor. This is, let's say this is the Anchor. Let's say, I don't know if it is or not. But Anchor gave increased armor, it gave increased void damage, and it gave endurance and endurance special and strength. A lot of good stats overall. Why did we swap off of Anchor, right? And the reason why we swapped off of Anchor is because Code of the Erased Sentinel, it also gives us increased armor at a higher rate than Anchor of Oblivion. It gives +1 to all Sentinel skills, which is handy. And it gives us armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. So remember, our first source of armor mitigation applies to damage over time is from Decayed Skull, right? And we're getting up to 30% over here. I have a 21% over here. Alongside the 29% from Code of the Erased Sentinel, we're talking like 50% armor mitigation applying to damage over time, which is pretty big, right? For going into further corruption, right? Damage over time becomes more of an issue as you progress. So that's the primary reason why I chose it. This roll obviously doesn't really matter for us, but we like the tier 7 Ellie res, we like the tier 6 Void res because it gets us closer to the cap across the board for our damage reduction, right? So that's why I'm running that here. You could run plus levels to Anomaly, that would be pretty good, or plus levels to Devouring Orb, or plus levels to Void Cleave. Those would all be pretty good if you can get them in this slot. Void, I think Void Res would be pretty good as well, or if you can get Vitality or Tier 7 Health, would also be pretty good, right? So there are options, but that's why I'm running Code of the Erased Sentinel now instead, right? And I believe everything else is the same. We're still running Pearls of the Swine. It gives us Vitality, all attributes, and all res. Pretty good, easy to get with LP. We're still running Bulwark of the Last Abyss, easy block chance, right? We're still running Brewmasters for the Vitality. We're still running Stymied Fate for the Doom and increased damage over time. Still running Aberoth's Command for the increased damage over time and Void Pen, and then still running Atrophy for the 20% penetration for all resistances for damage over time, and increased time rot duration plus slow chance, which of course the slow chance applies to our time rot with Rock Grip, right? 1% slow chance, 1% more damage with slow chance with void skills. So of course those are all still the same. Let's talk about passives. So 5 points into Time and Faith, 8 points into Fearless, 7 points to Juggernaut. Sentinel's the same. From Void Knight. Okay, so we're prioritizing things that give us health and armor here. So Dark Maw and Doom Knight are important. We still care about Patient Doom because it says increased void damage over time, which is just about everything, right? Just about everything. Otherwise, we still like the Time Rot chance and the Rock Grip and Renouncement. We still care about those things. We still care about pumping up our time out chance whenever it's free, right? Passive points make it free, but we want to prioritize vitality, right? So we're going 10 points into Eternal Form, 5 points into Temporal Velocity for the Devouring Orb creating Void Rift on cast, alongside just the raw vitality and cooldown recovery speed that it's giving us. We also have Abyssal Fluctuation still, and then importantly, we have Void Well to refund our mana. So all those are still pretty much the same. We have 5 points into Defiance for the Ellie Res and Endurance Threshold for 2% uncapped elemental resistance, because we're uncapping it anyways for Null Portent. We took the 5 points out of Future Mind and I guess moved it into there. And that's a pretty good summary of the changes that we made to the build. Otherwise, we don't really care about melee and throwing attack speed and echo chance. We're not casting that often. And we don't really, like, Mortal Cleave is nice for finishing out enemies, but we're not, this isn't a bossing build. This is a mono build, so that's what we're going for. Okay, so that's a pretty full overview of all the changes that we made to the build. I guess I should also point out from the blessings, we've swapped over from all res over here. Now that we have the all res on our Red Ring of Bedlaria, we are now moving the all res into critical strike avoidance. And so since we have 70%, we're at pretty much cap. So yeah, increased void damage, all res, armor, and then I just took chance to gain ward on hit. You could take mana here, but we have pretty much infinite mana anyways. So I figured since we're going to be getting hit anyways and taking like a lot of blocks, you might as well go for the ward. So that's the build. That's sort of everything you need to know. This is a full guide at the end of what I finished for this build. I know that obviously there's things like the Javelin build that's running around. Javelin is something that's like, it's just functionally a different build, right? That build is using the 300% more damage from Javelin to apply it to the time rots that are applied by the Javelin, and you're getting those time rot applications from the Void Cleave going into Dismantling Throws. And then it's really just a pure time rot build, right? That build is also, I think, using Black Blade of Chaos. Blade of Chaos, where is it? Because Black Blade of Chaos has up to a 120% chance to inflict time rot on hit. So that's, 240% more multiplier for time rot. That's a lot of damage, right? That's just a lot of damage, but that's functionally a different build, right, than what I'm doing, because I'm focusing around Smite, around Fissure, focused around auto bombing and sort of going through monos. This is meant to be easy on the hands, not really a boss killer. If you want to go boss killer, that's a really good route. I'm not going to say that this build is better than that one. That one's crazy, but we're focusing on different things, right? We're focusing on different things. This applies sort of to everything that's void damage over time, and that one's very focused on time rot. So hope y'all are enjoying. This is the update video. I am going to be out over the weekend, which is why I'm doing an update video rather than a new build. I'm also working on something else, which is pretty interesting. So maybe you'll see that one pretty soon. It's last Epoch related, but not a new build. And I think it has some potential. So we will see y'all later.